Hello, everybody, and welcome to Joe the Lawyer. I'm your host, Joe Palmetto, a practicing criminal defense attorney out of Pittsburgh, PA. And tonight we are going to talk about the Nicolas Maduro indictment, the federal court indictment that apparently, I believe, went active several years ago. So Maduro was indicted in 2023, and the Trump administration just recently acted on that indictment, as everybody can see. So I'm going to go through this, talk about, my interpretation of it, what it means, what he's looking at. I think we may have the answers to some of these questions already, but to hear it from a lawyer is probably going to help you put a little extra stamp on it. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. My name is Joe Palmetto, Joe the Lawyer, practicing criminal defense lawyer out of Pittsburgh, PA. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Every like, every subscription, every share helps. Trying to build this channel, trying to build an audience, give people type of content that they like, that they can learn from. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, share. Also, do a sip with me. The same time sip, which was pioneered by Scott Adams, who unfortunately is dying of terminal cancer right now. But this is for him. Sip with me. It tastes better when we sip together. Cheers. Just having some ginger ale tonight. Looking forward to watching the Steelers game tonight. As you know, I'm from Pittsburgh, and I'm a big-time Pittsburgh fan. So, hey, Zephiel, thank you for tuning in. Hello, Joe from Detroit. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I gave a little heads up this time, so I really appreciate people coming to see the show. And I just want to say, before I hop into everything, the direction of this show right now, I'm just brainstorming legal topics to cover and what's in the news, etc. But I'm open to hearing, my other channel was all about sovereign citizens, right? I'm kind of trying to move away from that. I want to talk about more general legal subjects. So everybody, let me know. Do you want me to just cover what's in the news? Do you want me to focus on murder cases, true crime, stuff that's going on in federal court, stuff that's going on with the president, Congress, etc. I would love to hear. But today, we are going to look at the Maduro, the Maduro indictment. And first things first, I'm looking here to find a year. Let's go to the bottom. That should tell us what year it is or was. Doesn't even do that. I believe it was originally filed in 2023. And if you watched my last video, I talked a lot about like international law, right? And the International Criminal Court, and how Steelers fans are crazy. I almost got into a fight at the bar I was in, PA. Yeah. I mean, most of them are cool, but the passion runs deep, and you mix that with some hotheads or some numbskulls, and you get some stupid behavior. Most of the fan base, I think, is just very passionate and, let's say, nonviolent. But as we all know, anything can happen in a bar. So sorry to hear that, Fael. But in the last video, I talked about how international law, it really, like, the United Nations is kind of just like a how do I put it, a Rotary Club or like a social club for all the countries in the world to get together and talk about the things that they like and the things that they don't like, and to take official positions on policy. But rarely is there any action through the United Nations, right? The Security Council is the United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, and China. And for the most part, I think anything that's done in the Security Council has to be unanimous. Those 5 countries can never get together and make a unanimous decision. And when they do, it's just to pick on some little country in Africa. And I'm not saying maybe pick on isn't the right answer. But that's the only time UN quote unquote UN peacekeepers go anywhere. Is all these 5 massive countries don't really have any interest, and they want to feel like they're doing something good. But if these countries have national security interests or national interest in a country, they're not going to let the UN get involved, and so it's pretty rare. But also you have the International Criminal Court, which can issue warrants for arrest and indictments. Like they have an indictment for Vladimir Putin. Okay, it will never be enforced. They might even have one for Nicolas Maduro. I don't know. It'll never be enforced. But what you have here is a United States federal court indictment, which actually has a chance of getting enforced, right? And that's what happened with the Trump administration in a very daring nighttime raid. They captured Mr. Maduro, and now he's going to stand trial in the United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Cheers. And it's really a fascinating indictment. We're going to run through it, not probably all of it because the Steeler game was on. But I want to go over the charges and a couple of highlights I saw. It's really, actually, it's not quite that long, 25 pages. But it's pretty fascinating read, just so you can get, if you want to get a handle on, the names and the main players in the international drug trafficking scene. This names a lot of them. They have an indictment for Netanyahu, who's at different or international organization. It might be the ICC. Let me see here. Why do I always go there? The internet. If you look, International Criminal Court, they do have indictments for a lot of world leaders. But and I don't want to say they're completely unenforceable, because they are and have been enforced. Here's overview on cases currently active before the ICC. How do I get kind of a better view of that? Let me see here. That's a little better, at least from my perspective. So you'll see here, and who did we ask about? Netanyahu. It's possible. I'm not seeing that. But they did issue one. They did issue one for Putin, right? You can see him here on the list. Vladimir Putin, March 2023. Venezuela investigation article. There you go. That's interesting. And then we see here Maria Lvova-Belova. Sorry if I can't pronounce that. Gerasimov, Shoigu. Yeah, I know those are two of the highest ranking generals in Russia. There's another guy and a couple other generals, admirals. This woman, who presidential commissioner for children's rights. Okay. And then Putin, which will never be enforced. But this one, this guy, Rodrigo Duterte, he, I believe, is in custody with the International Criminal Court. And as I was talking, I was in my last video, I was saying it's basically, you're only going to be brought to the ICC essentially one of two ways. They're kind of the same, is your own people, right? And the ICC is focused on people who violate international criminal law, which is a set of articles, comes out of The Hague in Belgium. And you violate these laws. Like, the ICC doesn't have a police force, doesn't have a military. So how are these actors? Oh, here we go. Yeah, Netanyahu, you're right. You got good shot, Raphael. So they issue these warrants for arrest, etc., indictments, and the only way the ICC is going to hear these cases is if somebody in their own country, and that's what happened to Duterte, which was interesting. He was a pretty powerful politician in the Philippines, but he lost. I mean, I think he lost his election, and the new ruling party captured him and turned him in. It's like, dude, get out of there. I don't know. Anyway, like Netanyahu, for example, like the ICC issues these warrants with Duterte. The Philippines new administration came into power, and they captured him, turned him over to the ICC. That's, so you either need your own country turns you over, or another country would turn you over. And the interesting thing about Putin is, and this probably applies to Netanyahu as well, is I think these ICC warrants are pretty, they're like most European countries are honor them. And so if somebody has this warrant out for their arrest and they step foot in, I don't know, France. I don't know if France is one of those countries, because I don't think every country in the ICC, but a lot of countries in Europe, if you to step foot, technically they're required by their own domestic law to capture, take you into custody and take you to the ICC, International Criminal Court. But like someone like Netanyahu or Putin, like, it's never going to happen, right? Like, these Russians almost certainly will never happen. But Duterte, the Philippines is not, some tiny, really podunk country. Like, it's sort of a rising power, and at least economically, but their own people turned them over. The interesting thing, and you say Western Europe is off limits for these people. The thing about the ICC, though, is that still at its core, like, it's a very political organization, because I don't think they would have the cojones to, although they did indict Vladimir Putin, but to indict, let's say, a United States official or official from Great Britain or the UK, the United Kingdom, or an official from France, even though these countries sometimes pull off some heinous stuff. So it's an interesting organization, how it will evolve, its role in the future, very fascinating. Right now, doesn't have too much teeth, unless, of course, you are a dictator in Africa, because I don't know if these African countries turn these guys over to the ICC, but you can see that's who gets picked on here is Africa. Most of the people here and the people that have been convicted through the ICC, it's Africa. So let's look at this. Let's look at this indictment a little bit, because that's what I promised the people. Got to give the people what they want. The introduction: for over 25 years, leaders of Venezuela have abused their positions of public trust and corrupted once legitimate institutions to import tons of cocaine into the United States. And I enjoy legal writers who are very plain and upfront, and that's kind of how this was written. Cheers. What'd you say, Zephael? We need to hack the list and add Joe the lawyer to it. Well, in that case, I'll be staying put in America. All right, I won't be leaving. Although I've been to Italy a few times. So Nicolas Maduro Moros. I've been to Japan too. Actually, lived in Japan for a couple of years. So Nicolas Maduro Moros. The defendant is at the forefront of that corruption, has partnered with his co-conspirators to use illegally obtained authority in the institutions he corroded to transport thousands of tons of cocaine to the United States. Since his early days in Venezuelan government, Maduro Moros has tarnished every public office he has held. I mean, that sentence doesn't really hold any illegal weight. It's just take a shot at the guy. As a member of the National Assembly, he moved loads of cocaine under the protection of Venezuelan law enforcement. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, he provided Venezuelan diplomatic passports to drug traffickers and facilitated diplomatic cover for planes used by money launderers to repatriate drug proceeds from Mexico to Venezuela. Excuse me. And then when you get down to this third sentence, this becomes a little interesting here. It's not just Maduro who's indicted. The drug trafficking has enriched and entrenched Venezuela's political and military elite, including Minister of the Interior, Justice and Peace, Diosdado Cabello Rondon, former Minister of the Interior, Justice Ramon Rodriguez Chacin, and all the way down to maybe the most interesting part of all, what is going to be the most interesting part of this case, is First Lady of Venezuela, Celia Adela Flores de Maduro. And then this other guy, Nicolas Ernesto Maduro. Okay, that's his son. Nicolasito, also known as the Prince. At various times since or about 1999, they've partnered with narco-terrorists from the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, FARC. And my understanding, I think this FARC organization is is kind of out of business, though, I'm not quite sure about that. The ELN, the Sinaloa cartel, the Zetas, Tren de Aragua. And so that's very interesting, right? They partnered with these Mexican cartels, which are probably more central to the drug problem. But, when you're dealing with a Hydra, you got to cut off all the heads. The defendants, Nicolas Maduro, a Venezuelan citizen, was previously the president of Venezuela and is now, having remained in power despite losses, the de facto but illegitimate ruler of the country. And, one of the things about all the countries out there, and look, I think this action, give you a bit of my own personal opinion here. I'm kind of on a I'm taking a wait and see attitude. I mean, the Delta Force, the United States military, pulled off a stunningly successful abduction of this individual. I mean, to go into another sovereign country, into their capital, into this guy's compound, capture him in the middle of the night with his wife without killing them, and I know a lot of people were killed, but without killing the targets, and then safely getting them out of the country it's an amazing military move, and so in that sense, it's kind of like it was the military side of it was starkly successful, but what's going to happen in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead, right? Are the same people who propped Maduro up going to remain in power, and then we see no real change in Venezuela's attitude or governance? Or is the country going to devolve into chaos and or starvation like they have in the past? Is a more radical and dangerous, government going to rise up and take over, kind of what we saw in Iraq, at least for a little bit, with ISIS? Is it going to impact Venezuela's neighbors by causing interstate war? It's like there's just so many. When you create instability, even if you're taking out a bad dude like Maduro, it's really tough to predict what's going to happen. So, the military pulled this decapitation off cleanly, and but if you look at Panama, I don't really know that much about Panama. All I know is Manuel Noriega was captured in the 1980s, and he was the drug dealing narco dictator of Panama, and the United States went in there and they got him, similar to this, and I don't know that it turned that country into a beacon of democracy or anything better. I'm not sure that Trump's goals, actually, I want to say his goals are not really to implement democracy. I think it was to take out an individual who was very unfriendly to the United States, an enemy who was cooperating with the United States' more major enemies, right? China and Russia, sort of thumbing their nose at us because this is right under the United States belly. And I think that sending a message and probably capturing the oil is more important to the United States administration, and putting someone friendly in there rather is more important probably than putting somebody in there who supports democracy. Of course, a Democratic leader is probably going to also be friendly. So why not kind of kill two birds with one stone? Although I don't know that the Trump administration's too interested in that. So, we'll really have to see. I'm not really that too worried about the international law component because, again, it doesn't have much teeth. Nobody really follows it. I guess these countries that really want to establish it are the ones that follow it. But, China, United States, Russia, major powers generally don't. Just doesn't mean too much at this stage of history. So the violation of international law, it's like, well, did we violate? I'm more concerned with the moral law. And in this instance, I think anytime you can take out a dictator like that, it's not really a bad thing. It's just, I know for sure what I don't want to see is something like what the United States did in Iraq and Afghanistan, try to rebuild a country just because, they want to take out a hostile administration. So all of those individuals were indicted. The most interesting indictment, right, is his wife, in my opinion, Celia Adela Flores de Maduro. And as far as I know, the other people that were indicted were not captured. As far as I know, I don't think any of them were. I don't know if any of them were killed. But the only two in this indictment that they got was Nicolas Maduro and his wife. And Zephiel, next dictator of North Korea. It's funny you say that because I don't know if you noticed, there's just been so much news is North Korea shot off a bunch of ballistic missiles after this because he's probably there. I mean, it sends quite the message, right? When the United States invaded Iraq, Saddam, I was in the Air Force at the time and I was stationed in Japan. I remember this starkly because when we captured Saddam and Saddam wasn't captured, I mean, I don't know if we were quite 1 year into the Iraq invasion, maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year. Somebody can Google that. But when he was captured, I can't recall exactly. We might have already had like some sort of airmen's, they'll have like these dinners and these, I don't really want to say dances anymore. We'd have like these dinners and all the officers would come up and talk. And we were at this dinner and they announced that Saddam Hussein had been captured. And, everybody in there was in the military. So everybody, like, cheers went out. Cheers just went out. It was like, woo! And we were watching the news. It was a big celebration. Everybody was clanking drinks, etc. And I think a lot of people thought, well, maybe the war's going to be over now, too. That sort of celebration, which isn't really how it worked out, right? So I don't want to say really, it's not how it worked out. To get a leader that this quickly is pretty impressive. Anyway, Celia Adela Flores de Maduro, de facto first lady, having married Nicolas Maduro Moros, she had a long-standing political career. Married him in 2013, and she acted as the president of the National Assembly, and I'm assuming that's like the Congress or the Senate. Starting when Maduro left that role to become Minister of Foreign Affairs between and about 2006 or 2011 as the Attorney General. So she was the Attorney General of Venezuela and as a member of the National Constituent Assembly in 2017. And then this part is pretty interesting too. The narco-terrorist organizations working in partnership with the defendants. And you have, of course, the FARC, the FARC, you'll see, this on November 30th, 2021, State Department removed FARC from the FTO list and simultaneously designated two FARC successor organizations as FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization. I remember reading that Colombia had come to agreement resolutions with FARC, and they were like these socialist, revolutionary insurgents that lived in the jungle and made a shit ton of cocaine. I guess Maduro dealt with them, but it looks like they have these offshoots that may still be functioning. The ELN, another Colombian organization like that. These Colombian ones are interesting because they're political, kind of like Pablo Escobar, right? Like he was he tried to get very politically active in Colombia, but these organizations are like these revolution, I think they started as political organizations that were concerned with revolution. Maybe some wanted some Cuban style revolution in their country, but then they turned into these narco terrorists that live in the jungle and make money. And at a certain point you got to wonder, is it about the revolution or is it just about money? Or is it about both? Maybe. Then you have the Sinaloa cartel, the Zetas, Cartel del Noreste. TDA is a violent transnational criminal organization. I'm not familiar with that one. But the Zetas and the Sinaloa are just these massive drug cartels in Mexico who probably do a lot more to facilitate the drug trade into the United States than Venezuela did, but obviously Venezuela was working with them according to this indictment. They're not political like FARC. They're just about the money and the power. And the next section, defendants corrupt drug trafficking and connections to narco terrorist groups. So, like any indictment, the beginning is going to lay out the facts of who the actors are and why we believe they committed crimes, right? And this is going to talk about it. And it's sort of, it's, one argument I've heard against, this and against going after Venezuela is that, oh, they don't directly deal drugs into the United States. And a lot of what I was reading here seems to sort of be true, but they are sending and facilitating drugs and weapons to these organizations that clearly are sending massive amounts of drugs and weapons into the United States. So, again, when you're dealing with a Hydra, you got to cut off all the heads. Cheers. All right. And, I just got an interesting question from Zephiel. As a lawyer, have you ever gotten warnings or things on defending people associated in gangs before? That's a really good question. I personally have not, and I have been involved in cases that sort of let's say involved inner city street gangs and also some other like biker type gangs, and I've been involved in those cases. But I have not received any threats. None of the cases that I had that involved those organizations really directly kind of implicated somebody else, which is where that may happen, right? Like if there's and remember, I'm the defense lawyer, okay? I'm not the prosecutor. The prosecutor might be the one who gets some crap because the prosecutor is the one bringing the criminal charges, but defense lawyers can get crap too because sometimes you have multiple defendants, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 defendants, and these people all start turning on each other, and some may cooperate with the government and others won't. And if you're a lawyer that's caught in that crosshairs, yeah, it could perhaps get shaky. I think for the most part, the lawyers are kind of left out of it because even these criminal organizations understand the lawyers are just doing their jobs. So the defense lawyer is usually not implicated. And, prosecutors, I think for the most part don't, although it certainly has happened and it happens, and judges draw the ire of individuals as well. I think back, at least in Pittsburgh, that kind of thing happened in the 60s and 70s and a bit into the 80s when the mafia was still kind of very active in Pittsburgh. The mafia is a lot less active in Pittsburgh, and these other sort of gangs don't really go to that level. I'm not saying that they could or that they wouldn't. It just doesn't seem to happen that often, at least not in Pittsburgh. Another thing to know about Pittsburgh is we do have gangs. We do have inner city gangs, and like I said, we have motorcycle gangs. But our inner city gangs are not quite as dangerous as I think gangs that you would get in Philadelphia or New York or Chicago, just because they're smaller. And there's this interesting theory in Pittsburgh that I think makes a lot of sense. If you guys have ever been to Pittsburgh, you know anything about the geography. Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh itself, is at the confluence of 3 rivers, the Monongahela, the Allegheny, and the Ohio River. And right there at that point is the downtown area. We call it the Golden Triangle, where all the businesses are, etc. And then the neighborhoods flow out of there. But all the neighborhoods in Pittsburgh are choppy, small, and separated by these 3 rivers. In addition to the rivers in Pittsburgh, it's they're if you went out west and said, oh, Pittsburgh's mountainous, they would laugh at you, right? But there are mountains and hills. Pittsburgh is extremely hilly. So if you Google the steepest roadway, the steepest recorded roadway in America. It's in the city of Pittsburgh. Okay, Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh is divided for Pittsburghers into the North Hills, the South Hills, and the West Hills, and not so much the East Hills, because the East is the one flat area, and that's kind of the way the city originally was built out, was towards the east. But North, South, and West, there's all these hills and all these small mountains. So Pittsburgh's, like, first of all, the neighborhoods are divided by these hills and these rivers, and then there are divisions themselves within the neighborhoods due to these crazy hills and these crazy rivers. And like, I'll tell you, like, growing up, my house was on a hill. My entire neighborhood that I grew up in is, there's not really, I'm not kidding, like, there's not really many flat streets. Like, there are parts of streets that are flat, but you will not find a, like, full street that is, like, flat, right? Like, if you go farther than a couple hundred yards, you're going up or down a hill, period, end of story. And so when I first went out west, when I was a kid, my family took me to Las Vegas. A bunch of a bunch of the adults, and they brought the kids. I remember driving through states like I don't know what states we drove through. I think Oklahoma or Nebraska. And I just could not believe how far you could see because of how flat the land is. I lived in Texas now. I've traveled a lot, so I've seen a lot of different landscapes. But Pittsburgh is extremely hilly, mountainous. There's rivers and creeks. If you look at, could have been Iowa, but if you Google Pittsburgh, they say Pittsburgh has more bridges than Venice. And so the geography, according to people in law enforcement, has meant that Pittsburgh is not very conducive to the formation of large gangs. So you have like these small neighborhood gangs, but you don't have these gangs that run out over these vast territories, right? Like you will see in Chicago or other large cities. And Pittsburgh's also not that large, right? It's not as large as Chicago, but even a city of similar size to Pittsburgh generally has more gang activity because the geography of Pittsburgh is so cut up. Gangs have a hard time forming. That's what law enforcement said. I believe it. Plus, it gets cold. I don't know. I think maybe more gang activity in warmer cities, right? I think you generally get more crime in warmer climates because people are just out and about doing stuff on a more regular basis, including getting into trouble. It's like when you're somewhere cold, you're home sitting on your couch. So Pittsburgh doesn't have that many gangs, but we do have these little baby gangs. Yeah, they exist. So, but back to that point though. I have never been threatened in that manner. There was a high profile case in about 2020 or 2021, sort of at the height of George Floyd. It was an individual who, there was a police officer who shot a young African-American man. The individual, I believe, was believed to have a gun. His name was Antoine Rose. And when the police pulled the car over and everybody in the car ran, and one of the police officers who'd arrived on the scene shot Mr. Rose, I think, as he was fleeing from the vehicle. And I believe it turned out that the gun, again, I can't remember these facts. The gun was in the car, something like that. But the attorney who defended the police officer, and this was in Pittsburgh, some people went and shot up his law office, and they did it like in the middle of the night. So maybe they didn't really intend to hurt anybody, just scare. But the lawyer was representing the police officer, and his office got shot up, and so that kind of sent a scare through the legal community. So those sort of risks. Those risks do exist, and we've heard those high profile cases of like judges getting killed. Which, it's not common, but it happens. It can happen. I think it happened a lot more in the 60s and 70s when organized crime was a lot stronger. But doesn't mean it can't happen again. But honestly, out of that, when you're dealing with when you have a prosecutor, a judge, and a defense lawyer, the defense lawyer is probably the one who is least likely to become a target because you're probably defending somebody who is part of that criminal organization, right? And they don't want to, you know what I mean? They want you to help usually, I would think, not that you hear that directly, but it's like, if the lawyer is helping a gang member in his court case, then, he's not the enemy of the gang, right? But I guess if you had rivals, etc. So let's look real quick at these statutory allegations. Narco terrorism conspiracy, count 1. Count 2, cocaine importation conspiracy. Count 3, possession of machine guns and destructive devices. And the first two, I think this is interesting because, again, I think like the conspiracy aspect means that Venezuela's likely and Maduro likely weren't directly, again, like the degree to which they directly imported cocaine or other things into the United States. It appears to be unlikely because if the Justice Department had direct evidence, they wouldn't just be charged with conspiracy, right? They could also be charged with just plain old narco terrorism. So count 1 is a conspiracy, count 2 is a conspiracy. It has to include actions from these other parties. Now, count 3 is a direct allegation against Maduro, possession of machine guns and destructive devices. Supersede knowingly used and carried firearms in furtherance of such crimes, knowingly possessed firearms, aided, abetted, carrying possession of firearms, to wit, machine guns that are capable of automatically shooting more than one shot. And these are sort of vague. So the trial will fill this in, which will be interesting. And then count 4, a conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. So it's only 4 counts, but probably any one of these counts, and I'm not a federal lawyer either, but federal sentencing is pretty stiff. Probably any one of these counts, you're going to see Maduro. He's going to end up in some sort of El Chapo like sentence, right? Like a life sentence or life sentences upon life sentences upon life sentences, because the allegation, the amount of the sheer amount of drugs that the United States is claiming Venezuela is linked to is going to be enormous. It's going to be enormous. So with that much drugs, probably looking at a life sentence, and then of course the machine guns and or the destructive devices. And again, it's going to matter. What's going to be important is going to be the amount and the amount and quantity of these items. But when you're dealing with an entire country, it's going to be massive. So only 4 charges. The trial itself will be interesting because they're likely have cooperating witnesses, right? And of course, a lot of law enforcement is going to testify. But you're going to need people who directly dealt with Venezuela that were involved in the shipment of drugs across the United States border, and that these shipments involved the weapons that the United States claims. So the cooperating witnesses will be interesting. It's something to look at. Like, are these former Zetas? Are they former Sinaloa? Are they Mexican nationals, Colombian nationals? Are they Venezuelan nationals? Will be very, very interesting to see how this whole thing is put together. It's probably going to be a heck of a trial. I imagine the United States has more than enough evidence given our ability to survey, capture, and coerce, which is very it's a very powerful capability. So he's charged with possessing drugs and dealing drugs and possessing guns, which honestly is something that I deal with on a regular basis on a much smaller level. And it's funny, some of my friends were joking, telling me that I should represent Maduro. And I said, I don't really have any federal experience, and certainly not in the Southern District of New York. I can't practice there, but I would accept it because from a defense attorney's perspective, case like that will make your career, right? It'll put your name out there, and it can really make you prominent, really make you a lot of money. So I would be for it. All right, so it's interesting. It's about 20-page indictment. You want to read the whole thing, go ahead. If you have any specific questions about it, but I just thought it was fascinating from the international law perspective, and just to see what he's charged with and see what his wife is charged with, because they're going to have to tie his wife in with some direct involvement as well. I don't know if just her being very intricately involved in the Venezuelan government is enough to convict her. And it'd be interesting to watch and see if she is if she's given a similar sentence, or if she is found guilty of everything, because she is almost going to certainly play the I didn't know card. And I doubt, though you never know, but I doubt Maduro would directly implicate her. Maybe the United States will make her an offer so that they implicate him. Although probably not, because they would only do that. They would only do that if they needed to, if they didn't have enough evidence on their own. As far as the trial being closed off, yeah, I don't think it'll be. Most federal trials are not run by video, but I do think they're publicly accessible. I remember when El Chapo was put on trial. You have the courtroom artists who put the drawings out, etc. And there were a lot of people following the case itself. So it'll be similar to El Chapo. But I don't think any federal, I want to say no federal courts have cameras, and they're not required to under the First Amendment. A court can, a particular state can do that. Like Florida has a lot of cameras in the courtroom, but a court in a state can also ban cameras if they see fit. And like Pennsylvania, for instance, you cannot record video or audio inside a courtroom. You can sit in there and take notes. You can have a sketch artist, but you cannot audio or video record it, and that's pretty much every single courtroom in Pennsylvania. I think it's a clear law. So that's the Maduro indictment. Again, if you have any questions about it, let me know. I might dive into it some more and read it in a later episode. Let's see, or at least jump back to it. Shootings drop off when the weather is cold in Detroit and Chicago. Right. I think, Pittsburgh's not quite as cold as those cities, but we have a pretty solid winter, and it snows a lot, and it's really hard to get around because of the bridges get icy, the rivers, and the hills. And so I think even though it doesn't get as cold in Pittsburgh, it's tough to get around because of the geography of Pittsburgh is pretty rugged. Monongahela Incline is what I think I remember. Not sure how many you have. Definitely have elevation changes. Yeah, you got it, Ziff. Like all over, man. Except like the east part of the city is sort of flat. That's kind of true. I never really went there growing up, but now that I've been old, once I went to college and stuff, I went to college on that side of the city. I was over there a lot more. It's kind of like there's sort of like a flat plain to some degree. The main neighborhood, like right behind the Golden Triangle, which is the downtown business district, is called the Hill District. And it's literally just this entire neighborhood that's on top of this big freaking hill. We have Troy Hill. A lot of the neighborhoods are named after hills. There's a neighborhood called Beach View because you get views in different parts of the neighborhood. It's kind of funny. Monongahela Incline. Yeah, there's two inclines. There's a Duquesne Incline and a Monongahela Incline. The Monongahela Incline is smaller and is still used mainly for transportation. The Duquesne Incline is bigger and is it's used for transportation, but it is mostly used for tourism. Minnesota and all cold weather states have the winter drop off. Did you ever get into precious metals? Not really, Zephiel. I have. I've thought about buying gold, and I think I have like some gold related stocks, but never really got into precious metals. Um, excuse me. Who mentioned Uniontown? Um, Uniontown. Yes, the mining union. Um, yeah, Uniontown is south of Pittsburgh, and yeah, there's hills down there. Western PA is kind of like the drop off of the Appalachian Mountains, so it's just like these rolling hills. But historically, lots of mining, and historically, lots of oil and oil exploration. There's a city about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh called Oil City. I think you guys know a little bit of history, but Standard Oil kind of came up in the Western Pennsylvania and Ohio area. It was sort of the beginning of the oil boom, and the early discoveries of oil happened in Western Pennsylvania. And then there's large coal mines, and that's one of the reasons Western Pennsylvania and Ohio became the center of United States steel. Steel making industry, which Pittsburgh is very much known for. The natural resources were very close by, plus the three rivers, which allowed for moving these items and products on the rivers by barge. You still see you still see a fair number of barges moving up and down the three rivers of Pittsburgh. So, Pittsburgh's industrial past, et cetera, et cetera. Uniontown was a big part of that. Uniontown, I think there were some steel mills down there. I know Uniontown was very big into mining, and the Pittsburgh area was mined, but like long, long time ago, and not anymore. But there's still mining in Western Pennsylvania, southern Western Pennsylvania. We butt up right against West Virginia. West Virginia and Kentucky are probably the two of the only states that are really serious about mining anymore, coal mining at least, in 2025. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with Mr. Maduro. I wonder if they'll capture any of these other people in the indictment. And, if anything, this thing that Trump pulled off, it was a hell of a warning shot to, Russia and or China, to maybe, you might not want to meddle in the Western Hemisphere. And I do, Trump's, quite the character. I'll say it's going to be interesting, and I'm hopeful to see if his actions will really reduce the fentanyl deaths, will reduce the drug trafficking that comes into the United States. But I think you're going to have to deal with Mexico one way or another. I'm not saying you deal with the Mexican government, but those cartels that operate, they have hundreds of, if not thousands of tunnels dug over underneath the border. They move drugs through border crossings. They move drugs through areas that don't have fences. They move drugs underground. They move drugs by airplane. They move drugs by boat. There's so many ways. The border's so big. How you combat that is really, really interesting. And I think Trump had talked about striking the cartels directly at some point in time. And, Mexico fought like almost its own little war against these traffickers, and it didn't really go that well. Of course, dealing with the United States military is completely different. The problem is the civilian casualties, right? Because they're like tons and tons and tons. If the United States did something like that, the number of civilian casualties could get really, really crazy. unpopular opinion, Mexico better than Iraq. Well, I mean, Raphael, let's say this. At least the United States could have stopped the drugs, right? If you go into Mexico, you stop the drugs. And it's also something the United States has done before. The Mexican American War. I'm almost positive that the United States did the United States capture Mexico City during the Mexican American War? I don't know. I don't know. But they did. The United States military did go into Mexico and fought battles in Mexican territory. You guys want to read some crazy history? There was a time when France in the 1800s, France invaded Mexico and captured Mexico City at one point in time. And then they just kind of like left. I don't know. I think they had threatened French like trading interests at some port in Mexico, and the French actually invaded Mexico and captured the capital. So a couple of countries have already gone in and like captured Mexico, and they're just like, oh, we're gonna, they give it back. Beating a country and maybe beating a country in a war or taking out some leaders is one thing. In real estate they call it buy and hold. In real estate it's called buy and hold, and in real estate you buy a piece of property and you hold it and the price goes up, but in global conquest, buying and holding is very expensive, right? Like it's very, very expensive and very difficult in 2025. Back when the Roman Empire did it, but man, they didn't care about what it cost, whether it was in lives or whatnot. And it's nowadays, what's that really worth? But it'll be interesting to see. Hey, Mass, how you doing, man? Thanks for tuning in. Listen, everybody, thank you very, very much. I'm going to be doing more videos and more live streams. So if you want, I put it on my page. But if there's certain topics you want, like I just love to cover things that my audience wants to talk about. So let me know. Mascot, I got to go watch this playoff game for the Steelers. It starts in about 8 minutes. I said 8:20. Go Steelers if you're a Baltimore fan. Boo. Sorry Detroit Joe. Joe from Detroit. Steelers. The Steelers surprisingly beat Detroit earlier in the year, and Detroit kind of had a disappointing season. I will say though that like I sort of the teams that I kind of root for outside of the Steelers would be the Buffalo Bills. My girlfriend's from Buffalo, and the Detroit Lions, and so I'm sort of disappointed. I thought Detroit might be a Super Bowl contender this year. Disappointed they didn't make the playoffs. So go Steelers. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye-bye.